probably. Right. Sheriff Sam Page from Rockingham County. Now, Sheriff, for our listeners that are not in North Carolina, some are, you're in Reidsville. Just where is that in the state, so everybody knows?
I'm about 25 miles north of Greensboro, North Carolina, and about 25 miles south of Danville, Virginia. I'm right on the border.
Right. You're right near us, so we have listeners there, actually, because we have a station in Danville, so it's probably picked up there, Sheriff. Now, look, it's tough to be a sheriff these days with all these illegals. So in North Carolina, what is going on when illegals come into your county? What do you do, and what's been happening?
Well, in 2010, we were involved in what's called the Secure Communities Program. We began working with the program. Since 2010 to the present, we've processed about 277 persons that are criminally charged illegal aliens through our jail system. The interesting thing was back between 2010 and 2014, prior to the PEP program, which was pushed out by DHS, we were seeing more and more persons being removed. So we went from the nearly 70% down to the 30%. And so now when people ask, well, what happens when a person is not picked up through immigrations? I said, I don't know. They're released by law from our facility, and then we don't know where they go. And I think that's the biggest problem in America is, you can hear there's over 500,000 absconders, persons that the ICE system have not been able to track. They don't know where they're at.
So they come into the country illegally. Mm-hmm. They're illegals. They broke the law. They end up in Rockingham County, right? You don't know how,
yes,
right?
Sir.
They just end up there. And you guys stop them for whatever reasons, or you pick them up, they got a traffic violation or jaywalking, whatever it is, you find, okay, well, they're illegal. Or they go in your jail, right?
Yes,
they go in your county jail because they've broken the law. And then ICE does nothing. You're told to release them, and that's it.
Yeah, you have to do so by law.
You have to release them.
And normally or in the past, you would see a person that was charged with a criminal offense. Once it was time for him to be released, him or her, then that person would notify ICE, and ICE would come in and pick the person up and do the transfers. And your expectation will be deported. Now, out of 277 persons that have come through my jail facility, I think it's somewhere between 13 and 17 have been in my facility before, and I think 13 previously deported. And that's fairly recent.
So out of 277, 13 were deported back. What happened to the other 243?
Again, the biggest answer for that was, I don't know.
You just don't know.
We don't know.
They just get released and then they're gone.
There's a duty and responsibility of every sheriff in America, and we all basically run jails, is to know who's coming into our facility and who's being released back out into the community. And from a matter of public safety, unfortunately, when a person's asked if a person's illegally in the country, charged with a criminal offense, and he's released, where do they go? And the only answer I have is I release them by law, but where they go from there, I don't know. Because ICE does, and I think a lot of it's because the immigration agents' hands are tied in doing their job on the interior enforcement, and so the ability to track persons is not there.
That's unbelievable. Now, Sheriff Page, just share with our audience the whole sanctuary city concept.
Yes, sir.
I know you're not involved in it, but can you elaborate on it? Like, how does a city become a sanctuary city, and what does it mean for the residents there?
Well, what we see in North Carolina, there was a big push last year, and the legislature actually allowed private businesses or churches or even some municipalities to issue identification to persons that very well are illegally in the country, and allow them to have some type of identification. And the rationale was that when they have an interaction or contact with law enforcement, that they have some type of identification. But the problem is, unless it's a federally issued or an actual government issue ID where we know who that person is, how do you know who that person is?
Right.
And what that does, in my opinion, is when you produce those IDs in mass like that, a lot of times it basically encourages that sanctuary process. We can go back to Kate Steinle case over in San Francisco when you had a sheriff out there that had the opportunity to notify ICE that he had a person been deported multiple times and that they were getting ready to finish up with him. But because there were policies that the municipality had, the sheriff's hands were tied on notifying ICE, and subsequently that person was released, and then later, Kate Steinle was shot.
Unbelievable. I want to ask you about something we were talking about offline, is that you're now becoming one of the epicenters of the drug cartel in Rockingham, North Carolina. What is going on?
Well, when you talk with the DEA and they tell you from the information that North Carolina is number 2 in drug trafficking routes next to the Atlanta region for the East Coast. But if you look at your major highways, Interstate 40 coming right out of Texas, Arizona, in 2 days good traveling time. Those drugs are in our communities. We participate with the HIDTA, high intensity drug trafficking area in the Piedmont area. And it's not uncommon to arrest persons that are directly tied to the Mexican drug cartels that are trafficking right through our communities, and some are set up in different communities throughout the United States. So the cartel are in the United States. They're not doing the type of activity you see just south of the border with the beheadings and the other type of activity, not trying to draw their attention. But the business is alive and well, and that's why we have to perk up. We have to make sure that our police chiefs and our sheriffs across the country are aware that what comes through the border doesn't stay there. And those drugs, and those major drugs, you're hearing the push out a lot of opioids, heroin increases.
Heroin. Yep.
Well, it goes back to the original thing, how I originally got involved in this process. We better put a tight clamp and start securing that border down, because most of the black tar heroin is coming right out of Mexico.
Coming right out of there, and it's going up through North Carolina, right through your own.
Going to New York,
going to New York. And, when we were in New Hampshire, I was in Manchester for a week covering the New Hampshire primary. And one of the biggest local issues there in New Hampshire was a heroin epidemic that had just come from nowhere.
Well, the sheriff up in Chicago last year was talking about he had a 300% increase in the heroin use. The pain opioids and stuff like that.
Right.
It's a lot cheaper to get the heroin, a $15 bundle of heroin versus a $50 pill. And so, a lot of persons are turning to the heroin, shooting it up.
It's unbelievable.
And we're seeing the overdoses also associated with the heroin.
And we just do nothing about it. We just let these illegals, and we let the cartel just walk right over.
John, we got to secure the border.
We've got to do something. I tell you what, that's why I've been for Trump from day one. At least he understands it. He might not be able to fix it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I do support Donald Trump 100%. He supports law enforcement, and he gets it. He understands in order to have a safe America, we've got to secure our borders and define our borders.
Well, look, do you think the wall would actually work?
Well, it happened to work in Yuma, Arizona, when they did the 200-mile stretch there. I think that in your high population areas, and I've been to the border several times, but from what I gather is your higher population areas, that's where you need your border fencing and walls to restrict that entry. And then you need to have Border Patrol agents that are on the border and allowed to do their jobs, securing our great border.
Well, it certainly worked in East Berlin when the Soviets put it up. It certainly stopped East Berliners from going to the West. So
you bring that up. I spent 6 months in Berlin in the military. So when the wall was up in the 70s, and so I'm very aware of that. But it did work.
I mean, it was a horrible thing to see it, especially from if you were in West Berlin and then you went up there and you just peered over it. It was one of the most eerie things I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
As a young man in my whole life, my father took me there as a teenager, and I became an anti-Soviet, anti-communist. I mean, just seeing it was unbelievable. But it does work. There's no question. Let's get to this Orlando shooter, a fighter from ISIS, a radical Islamist terrorist, gets on the FBI watch list, puts different things out on Facebook. The FBI interviewed him a couple of times. Obviously, they knew there was something not right with this guy. And all of a sudden, then he gets off the list, and now we have the execution of 49 gays in a bar, defenseless, just shot in cold blood, horrible situation. And, of course, the Democrats are saying, the problem is he had access to guns. The problem is, though, that FBI interviewed him. He was on their list, then he was off their list. What's the deal?
It's kind of like the issue with Boston, with the two brothers in Boston going back and forth to Syria and those areas, stuff like this, and then coming back. I don't know what the total criteria is for a terrorist watch list, but something was there, and I think that they had been looking at this guy for a while, but apparently within their criteria there was not enough information to either to charge this person or to this person through the federal system. But I'll tell you this: if the Democrats have got it wrong, that more gun control is not going to make us a safer community, but disarming the citizens is going to be a disservice to the law-abiding citizens. And I would hope that the Republicans do stand strong and oppose any additional gun restrictions being placed on our law-abiding citizens, because that's not the answer. You never hear anything about the mental health issues in America, or you hear very little of that. But we see in our own communities and across the country that it's failing. The system is failing, the mental health system. And then, of course, when we talk about the immigration system, illegal immigration, stuff like this, look at the failures there, the failure to act, the failure to lead from Washington down. And that affects the men and the women in the field from ICE, Border Patrol. But it all starts at the leadership level, and that's where the failure is here at the Capitol.
No question about it. It's a very, very sad and scary situation. A lot of us just cannot fathom. We had Peggy and Fred Davis on a couple of minutes ago, Sheriff, and ranchers in Arizona, and Fred was saying all Obama administration the Border Patrol agents to the border, and the problem stops. They refuse to carry out the law.
In 2010, the sheriffs from southwest border areas, when I first started meeting these guys, they asked the president to come out, and as far as he could come was Tucson. And when he came to Tucson, it was for a fundraising event, or to make the jest about the alligators in the moat. You remember that?
Yes.
And so the thing about it is, when a president doesn't take the safety of their citizens serious, there's a problem. As a sheriff in my county, I do take the safety of my citizens very serious. But it just amazes me about the administration. It's not a serious deal. But protecting Americans has got to start at our borders. Homeland security begins at home. It begins at our borders. And we fail to do that, it affects the rest of the country. And I've always said this before. If we fail to secure our borders, every sheriff in America will become a border sheriff.
All right, that is going to be the final word from Sheriff Sam Page from Rockingham County, North Carolina, 25 miles south of Danville, Virginia, and he's right in the middle on the forefront of the battle. We love having him on. We're going to have him back. Sheriff, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
So much. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network.